As permitted by the governor's disaster declaration of August 21st, the determination's been made that an in-person meeting is not practical or prudent for this committee to meet in person at this time. To ensure a transparent and open meeting as much as possible, we have and will post the meeting materials approximately 1 week in advance, and will provide a recording of this meeting linked on our website. We also will take all votes by roll call. So at this time, I'd like to combine the attendance roll call with the approval of the minutes. So if I can get a motion and a second to approve the minutes of June 17th, please state your name and say so moved.
Alan Mellis, so moved.
Keith Privet.
All right, we have a motion and a second. And are there any questions, any comments on the minutes from any of the members? If there's no questions or comments, staff, will you please call the roll?
All right, thank you. Before I call the roll, I just want to introduce a couple new members, officially new. First, we've got Maggie Zerwinski representing Active Trans, John Donovan representing FHWA, and Aaron Mertens representing Metro. So at this time, I'm going to read the names of all the members, and if you could unmute yourself at that time, say present, and your vote of yay, nay, or abstain from approval of the minutes. All right, so Ed Barsati.
Here.
Can I get a yay or nay on the minutes?
Yay.
All right. Maggie Zerwinski.
Here and yay.
All right. John Donovan.
I am here, and I don't know if I'm a voting member on this committee, but if I am, I vote yay.
Yeah, you are. All right.
Okay.
Carlos Feliciano.
I'm here, yay.
Jessica Hyink.
Here, yay.
Sid Kenyon.
Here, yay.
Patrick Knapp.
Here, yay.
David Longo. Okay. Aaron Merton.
And yay.
Alan Mellis.
Here and yay.
Jason Meter.
Here, yay.
Randy Neufeld. Jessica Ortega.
Here, yay.
Ryan Peterson.
Here, yay.
Leanne Prather.
Present, yay.
Keith Privet.
Present, yay.
Tom Rickert.
Here, yay.
Karen Shinners.
Here, and what are we voting on? I got on a little late.
Approval of the minutes from June 17th.
Yay.
Pamela Silsky. Kevin Stansel.
Here, yay.
All right, that's the end of the roll call.
All right, the motion carries, and we'll move to the next agenda item. Again, that was agenda item 1 and 3 that we handled together. Agenda item 2, I don't know if there's any agenda changes. I don't believe there are. Does anybody have any announcements? All right, we'll move to item number 4, the task force members meeting results. Caitlin Goodspeed with CMAP is going to give us a presentation on the results of that. We're generally not looking for any discussion on this item, just kind of informational item.
Hi, everyone. Well, first of all, I just wanted to thank you for taking the time to speak with me and Jen. We had some really great conversations and really enjoyed getting to know each of you a little bit better. The purpose, as you know, of this exercise was to get a better sense of why you all joined the task force, you know, what you like about it and ways you think it could change or improve. So next slide, please. We spoke to about 18 out of 20 task force members, so we got some really great insight that we'd like to share with you now. As you know, we asked 4 main questions. So why did you join the Bike Ped Task Force? What is your vision for the task force? What can the task force do better? And then in light of COVID-19 and renewed calls for racial justice and equity, how is your organization adjusting, and how can CMAP and the task force best support your efforts? So next slide. So to kind of answer the first question, we found that most people are replacing a colleague on the task force, but also have an interest in bicycle and pedestrian planning. A lot of people see themselves as advocates, either for bike ped issues generally, or as they relate to specific issues such as safety, trails, or other modes of transit. We learned that people really enjoy coming to the meetings for networking, gaining different perspectives, information sharing and exchange. We heard that these meetings help people stay up to date on what's happening in the region. One member said that the task force, really serves as a regional clearinghouse for comment and opinion. Now, in terms of, what people want to see out of the task force, members said that they would like the task force to be more action-oriented. We heard that you want to be more involved in reviewing project evaluations and assisting with funding decisions. We understand that the task force used to hold workshops and trainings for its members, and although there was still a good bit of information sharing, there was also a lot more decision making. A lot of members also expressed an interest in hearing from community leaders doing work on the ground, people from smaller geographic areas and different places throughout the region, not just the city. When it comes to the meeting structure, people said that they wanted more time on the agenda for question and answer, debate, kind of like lively discussion and interaction on topics such as policy and legislation, new technology and bike ped, strategies for completing trail networks, strengthening multimodal connections, outreach strategies, etc. And then we also heard that people want to hear about projects that are currently in the works, as there might be more of an opportunity there for the presenter to ask for advice and get feedback. And then lastly, in light of the pandemic and social unrest, we learned that many of your organizations are adjusting and making efforts to address these issues. We know the Active Transportation Alliance is refocusing their time and efforts in the South Side and in the South suburbs. CDOT, has created safe streets to accommodate for the increase in people who are choosing to bike and walk. And many organizations are thinking about their outreach strategies and how they can work with those communities that have been most impacted by everything that's happened. It was actually very kind of uplifting to hear what's being done, but we just want to reiterate that if you think CMAP can help in any way, please let either me or Jen know. We would love to provide assistance, wherever possible. Okay, so moving forward with some initial thoughts that we had, through this process, we learned a lot about people's different expertise. We have planners, landscape architects, we have people who analyze data, we have train advocates, bus advocates, we have people who have been working on regional trails for years. We have so much expertise in the room, and we all have this kind of like opportunity to meet and bounce ideas off of each other. The first thought Jen and I had was to create an online directory where people can kind of share contact information, expertise, topics they're interested in, presentation ideas, and upcoming events with their organizations. So, say you're working on for example, like a complete streets policy for your town and you have some questions, there are a number of people on the task force who have gone through that process and can help. So we wanted to have this directory mostly as a resource to members on the task force. The second thought sort of addresses this desire to be more action-oriented. We sort of want the task force to be involved in decisions on relevant project evaluations and performance measures. So to that end, Jen and I are going to seek out opportunities at CMAP where the task force can really provide this type of input. The third thought we had was to start inviting community leaders from all over the region to present at these meetings. Diversifying the voices we hear from will make for more interesting discussion and provide insight into issues that we might not have been privy to as a task force before. We're also planning to adjust the agenda so that there's more time for discussion. We know that these agendas tend to be packed, and we got that from a lot of task force members, but we also do want to create space for more dialogue amongst members, and we'll do that in future meetings moving forward. And then the final thought kind of revolves around the meeting structure. So we want to be better about posting materials in advance so there's ample of time to review. We're also going to move up the December meeting a little bit earlier because we heard that most years that meeting is canceled. And then we're also going to add an additional meeting into the calendar so we don't have to cram, you know, like a year's worth of updates into 4 meetings. So that's what Jen and I are kind of thinking. We're totally open to other suggestions, but we're going to start incorporating these changes into our work plan for this task force that we're currently putting together, and really hope that, you know, moving forward, these meetings can be more beneficial to all of you and more interesting. So that's kind of all I have. We will keep you in the loop as we kind of make any bigger changes or as projects come up that we might want your input on. But that's it for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Caitlin. I just want to say thank you to the 18 committee members that spent some time, you know, just working through these questions and helping us with the survey. And again, this is stuff that we're still digesting a little bit, and we're trying to implement as much as we can, and we'll keep you updated, as Caitlin mentioned. I just wanted to also mention that there's an individual on the phone call that doesn't show up as with a name or anything, but if you can make sure if you're on the phone that you are muted. So anytime you're not speaking, make sure that you're muted. There was a little bit of interference there during Caitlin's presentation. We'll move on to item number 5, the Bureau of Design and Environment BDE manual update from the Illinois Department of Transportation. Carlos?
Yeah, I'm here. Can I go ahead and get started?
You can get started. Thank you.
All right. So the task force requested that we do a presentation on some of the updates that Idot underwent last year in 2019, sometime around the end of the summer, early fall, to our Chapter 17 of the Bureau of Design and Environment Manual, which is the manual that we use to develop state highway improvement accommodations for both bike and ped. So just to introduce myself to everybody, my name is Carlos Feliciano. I am the District 1 in-house project and environmental studies unit head, which means that I oversee a group of engineers that do preliminary engineering and environmental studies for the state highway system. In my other duties as assigned, I am also the District 1 ADA and Bikeway coordinator for the Chicagoland area and the 6-county area around Chicago, which means that I provide guidance, information, training for Idot staff on bike and ped accommodations, as well as ADA accessibility. So I will. So just a little bit of our policy. Per Illinois state law, there is a complete street, what we call the complete streets law, that requires Idot for state highway improvements to give full consideration in the planning and development for bicycle and pedestrian accommodations. And if we're within 1 mile of an urban area, they shall be established in conjunction with improvements. Urban areas are defined as those with populations of over 50,000 citizens. There are some exceptions to this compliance, and it's for resurfacing improvements, where we just mill 2 inches, put 2 inches back on the roadway. We're not widening the travelway or stabilizing shoulders. So those scope work is exempt from this. There's also an exemption for where it is approved by the Secretary of Transportation due to safety issues, cost, or the absence of need. To date, Idot has never requested this exemption for emissions from the Secretary of Transportation, so it is not something that Idot really looks to request. And then the last exemption is going to be for access control facilities, such as interstate expressways, or any facilities where access is limited. However, bicycle and pedestrian ways may be included in resurfacing projects where there's local support. So if a municipality is reviewing our multi-year program and they identify resurfacing later in the program where they can restripe to accommodate bicycle accommodations, they can start those discussions with Idot. The only caveat is that those resurfacings are usually, some of them can be short notice. We would have only 3 months to put plans together. So a lot of times that may exclude those locations, but it is an option that is available. Idot utilizes the ASTO guide for development of bike facilities, what we call the bike guide, as well as the MUTCD manual for the basis for our design and environment manual. We do have a new study that came out, and back in December, before things started getting kind of ugly, I was planning on giving a task force a presentation on a new study that Idot released. It's called the Bicycle and Pedestrian Accommodations Study, where we look at various different facilities, and I have a slide that's going to go over that. That can be used as a reference and a resource. In urban environments, oftentimes facilities are not covered under BD manual, so we do have different guides that we can utilize as references. And ACTO Bikeway Design Guide has been used in the past for facilities that are not covered under Idot policy. So that is something that we're allowed to look at as a reference. So the Bike and Ped Accommodation Study is a 3-volume document that we developed that has 20 facilities for bicycle and pedestrians. It's broken down into overall findings. And basically what we did is we were starting to get a bunch of requests for these accommodations that weren't necessarily typical for Idot to implement in state highways. And we kind of got tired of always saying no because we just didn't know how they would perform. So we put together this document that aggregates the research done for multiple facilities in the tenets that Idot looks to evaluate, which are safety, operations, and maintenance. So we had a consultant, Primera, do this study for us, and it's a pretty robust document. You can see how it's broken down. Currently, it's available in Idot's website. So the link is provided below. If you go into the travel information under recreation, trails and paths, you will see the study is available for public use. So on each Idot construction project, Idot evaluates and documents safety issues and bikeway warrants. If the warrants do not exist, Idot will document the absence of need. If they do exist, we will assess the appropriate accommodation. And then in urban areas, as I mentioned before, Secretary must approve any emissions. Any areas outside of urban areas, our bicycle and pedestrian policy engineer would be the one to approve those emissions. I wanted to put this slide here just to remind everybody what Idot's cost participation policy is for bicycle facilities. Basically, if you own a structure, Idot pays for any bicycle pedestrian facility at 100% our cost. Anything on road would be 80-20 local cost participation unless it's a shoulder. At that point, Idot pays 100% of those costs. And if it's off-road, it's again an 80-20 split. If there's an existing path, either a sidewalk or a bike path, and Idot is impacting it, we pay for it at 100%. We replace it wherever we're impacting. And then for maintenance participation for structures, Idot maintains those facilities. There's a couple of asterisks in there, and it's because Idot does not plow bike paths or sidewalks. So on structures, we'll request the local agency to take over that maintenance responsibility. But if the sidewalk settles, it's considered a structural element, so Idot will improve it whenever it's making structural improvements to the bridge. For on-road facilities, Idot will maintain traditional or buffered bike lanes. And there's asterisks in there, it's because like if there's bike symbols, those are usually also transferred to the local municipality for maintenance, just because our cycle of restriping is less frequent than for local municipalities. And then locals are responsible for on-road accommodations if they're separated bike lanes, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. and then vertical separation elements as well. If it's off the road, so any sidewalk or bike paths that are off the road, maintenance is always transferred to the local agency. So oftentimes we'll get inquiries from municipalities or from citizens saying, I would like, for a sidewalk or a bike path to be included on this roadway, and municipalities often say, well, that's Idot's roadway. You have to request it to them. The reality is that even though it's Idot's jurisdiction of the roadway, Idot does not maintain those. So oftentimes I have to kick it back to the municipality to say, yes, it's our roadway. You have to come with a permit for any sidewalk or bike path. You just keep that in mind. It reduces the amount of coordination that has to be done. So in 2019, we had an update. So the next couple of slides, I'll go through what those updates were for the Bureau of Design and Environment Manual. So there are 5 warrants that Idot has to look at for bikeway warrants. If we meet any one of these warrants, then accommodations are pursued further. The first warrant is the planned bikeway warrant, which basically is if the route or street is designated as a bikeway or recommended bike route, it would trigger that warrant. Second warrant is a volume warrant, and I'll spare you reading the smorgasbord that's in there, but basically if we expect more than 25 bicyclists, then that warrant would be triggered. The next one is a destination warrant, and this one was updated with the revisions. It's basically, does the road provide access to a park, recreational area, school, or other significant destination? This warrant is somewhat subjective because, what do you define as a significant destination? But it used to say, does the route provide exclusive access to a park, recreational area? So because of that exclusive sentence has been taken out, this warrant is, almost always going to be triggered because it's what do you define as a significant destination? The next warrant is an access warrant. And basically I call this the bridge warrant. If your roadway provides access across a river, railroad, highway, or any other corridor, then we understand that structures are expensive and they're cost prohibitive. So if there's a structure that Idot is working on, more likely than not, we will make sure that bike and ped accommodations are not precluded from occurring in the future. That way, local agencies are able to do their proposed improvements and not have to worry about structure costs. And the last warrant's rarely ever triggered, but is if a highway project negatively affects recreational transportation utility of an independent bikeway or trail. So say you have an at-grade crossing along a 2-lane street, and we're widening it to a 6-lane superhighway. So that would negatively affect the ability of that trail to continue at its current location. So that's what that warrant is. This is the updated facility selection table. So this is what our engineers utilize to determine what the recommended accommodations are. This table was revised in its previous incarnation before 2019. The last column on the right was a shared use path column. So oftentimes for high-speed, high-volume roadways, that was the recommended accommodation. So you can see that we've revised it to be all of it for on-road accommodations. And the reason why Idot decided to go this route is so that the cost participation element of a shared use path was no longer part of the equation if it wasn't needed. So it does provide engineers the flexibility of including a shared use path in all contexts now. So whereas before it used to be high speed, high volume, now it doesn't matter as long as if you're able to put in a shared use path, then you're able to do it under any context. One thing to note is that local coordination and site conditions will affect or require modifications to the recommendations from this table. So the design may be adjusted. However, providing the highest and best bikeway facility that conditions and context dictate is better than providing no accommodation at all. We may have a bridge and the local agency says we're not interested in a bike accommodation. Well, every 4 years you vote for a new administration. So oftentimes we've received a municipality tell us, no, we don't want it. And then a few years later, they come back and say, well, who said no to that? And, you know, it becomes an awkward conversation. So oftentimes, Idot will put a shelf as the highest of the bikeway facility. So the locals have no cost. We're still meeting our policy, and in the future, we're not precluding that accommodation from taking place. So this update requires or adds some information for resurfacing projects to try to add some sort of awareness to the designers that, yes, you're not required to install bicycle accommodations with resurfacing projects. However, you should take a look at the feasibility of doing it if you have the roadway space to do so. So that is something that's new to the engineers at Idot. So I have a training scheduled for them later this month to kind of try to get them used to, hey, you know, you guys should be looking at this as part of your resurfacing. And there's a process that we've outlined for them to take a look at these resurfacing projects. Again, because they are so short notice, oftentimes they may not be able to provide accommodations, but we're trying to encourage them to move towards the low-hanging fruit if they're able to take advantage of it. In the case of rural projects, ever since the policy for complete streets came out in Idot's BDE manual, we've always paved shoulders. So whereas before we used to have a 3-foot paved, 5-foot aggregate shoulder, ever since 2010, we've been doing mainly fully paved shoulders. So we will pave the full 8 feet because it's a win-win both for bicycle and complete street accommodations for rural and suburban areas, as well as providing a safe space for cars to be able to go if they're stalled or to pass a stalled vehicle to improve safety of the roadway. One of the things that modifications that we've made in the last few years is rumble strips are very important to Idot for run up the road crashes. So they help to wake up vehicles, the drivers. So, however, when you have a 4-foot shoulder and you have a 16-inch wide rumble strip, then it becomes an encumbrance on the bicyclist. So we do have a revised highway standard to have a smaller footprint from the rumble strip, still be able to include those rumble strips, but allow at least 3 feet of space for cyclists to have a safe space to ride on. So that's one thing that sometimes gets overlooked. So we're just trying to make sure that people are aware that they do have that flexibility for ensuring bicycles are accommodated even on safety improvements. So shared lane markings are a new addition to the Chapter 17. They're commonly referred to as sharrows. So we have guidance on shared lane markings. They're approved in the MUTCD. So we have design guidance for minimum requirements, as well as for roadways and for bridges. And then we do provide some guidance to them as to, you know, the spacing of the sharrow symbols. And I'm not going to go into the detail of all of the different requirements and distances that are shown in the slides, just because limitation in time. So I just wanted to make that clear. The presentation that I gave at the Ride Illinois Summit on Monday is more robust, and I go through all of these different details, and it's like a 2.5-hour presentation. So I didn't want to bore you today. Bike lanes, conventional bike lanes were included in the manual before 2019. However, we do have an increased guidance on buffered and separated bike lanes are brand spanking new. Although conventionals were always there, you can see that for buffered bike lanes, we have design guidance for 2-way buffered bike lanes, as well as 1-way buffered bike lanes. And then the separated bike lane is one of our latest additions. This is new as of 2019. It does provide guidance as to what those minimums have to be. We had an improvement that we did in the city of Chicago, which is to date the only separated bike lane, state highway. And it was Clybourne Avenue from Division to North Avenue, and you can see that it was a retrofit improvement that we did, but we partnered with CDOT to develop the separated bike lane, and that study, along with the bike and ped accommodation study that we published in our website, helped to give guidance and structure to this section of the BD 17. So it talks about, considerations for drainage, like triangles, intersections, transitions, loading zones, things of that nature. As far as the vertical separation elements, we do not specify what that vertical separation element has to be. For our Clybourne project, we looked at numerous options that were available to us, and ultimately we decided with a cast-in-place V6 curb. But there is flexibility in the policy for making sure that it's either more expensive but more aesthetically pleasing and a higher facility, or less expensive and be able to be quickly implemented. So there's some flexibility in the policy for those. One thing to note is race cycle tracks. The city of Chicago does have some race cycle tracks. However, these are not discussed in the Bureau of Design and Environment Manual. We are looking into this in terms of our policy. So central office in Springfield, they are aware that this is a gap in our policy. So they're looking into best practices and some guidance to provide our staff, so that in case a race cycle track becomes either a request or the more appropriate accommodation, that our engineers will be able to have some guidance as to how to implement them and what requirements they have to meet. So we just wanted to make you all aware of that. The intersection treatments section of Chapter 17 has been greatly improved. It has facilities that are brand new. Some of them are under interim approval by the MUTCD. We've introduced bike boxes, two-stage bike turn boxes, dotted bike lane extensions through the intersection. Green pavement marking is an area that our Bureau of Design and Environment Manual now discusses. Before that, it was not discussed. We do not have green pavement markings on state highways. There is a concern from our operations staff and our maintenance staff about maintenance liability for these stripings, but at least now that it's in our design manual, it'll give our engineers and staff another tool in the toolbox. So bike signals are also covered and discussed. Dash markings through auxiliary lanes and then protected intersections are also covered. And the large majority of them are brand new to the BDA manual. So if you've done projects with Idot before, it's worth taking a second look. Bike boxes basically are designated areas for approaches consisting of advanced stop lines and bike symbols. Basically, this gives bicyclists a space to get ahead of the vehicle, so that when that red light turns into green, they're able to take advantage of that and not fall behind a vehicle. So there's a really important guidance of minimum design criteria and signage that's required. Then we have two-stage turn boxes, which are areas designated at intersections for bikes to wait for traffic to clear before proceeding and making a left turn into the adjacent street. For those people who are, maybe not as gung-ho and experienced to take the lane and the left turn and be able to make that left turn as a vehicle. So these are some options that are available. Like I said, bike signals also under interim approval. So these four new facilities, even though they're covered under the BDA manual, they do have interim approvals. So they must be reported to Idot's Bureau of Traffic Operations in central office to be able to maintain an inventory and do future assessments as they become available. Shared use paths, I would say that these have been our bread and butter for a number of years. The district strongly supports them. So overall, not much has changed in this section of the BDA manual, except for a renewed emphasis on the separation from the path and vehicles whenever possible. When you don't have separation, there's some mitigation strategies that are accommodated. You know, oftentimes people will think, well, I can't meet the separation, so I just put a guardrail in there to separate vehicles from bicyclists. Well, when you look at the dimensions of a guardrail, you're only really saving 1 foot, from the 5 foot offset that's required. So really, you're not gaining all that much. There are other alternatives, such as barriers, which do have a smaller footprint, usually 1 foot to 1.5 feet. So we're trying to create that awareness in our engineers that, you know, going by default saying I'll put a guardrail is not always the best answer. The update does separate and create more awareness as to a shared use path outside of a structure on the roadway versus a path on the structure. And it does provide some good guidance for the height of the bicycle railing is a 4 foot minimum. Typically, Idoc has used 4'6", so our district has been okay with this. Has no issues with that. And then for the barrier, it has to be a minimum 3 feet height. It's higher for bridges over expressways and access control facilities. And one thing that I try to awareness that I try to create in our engineers is that, you know, oftentimes engineers will default to a shared use path on bridges. Well, that's fine and dandy, but you do have to take some considerations into it. Oftentimes we rely on overhangs for our shared use paths. So that last segment where the path is at is oftentimes not structurally supported. It's just part of a moment in the superstructure. However, in our district, at least, we have the Aspen A52 bridge inspection unit, which has a clearance of only 11 foot 6 inches. So we're installing a 10 foot path, and it's actually recommended to be 14 foot. If we're installing a path of that size, then you're taking away the option of being able to inspect that bridge with our current equipment. So you would either have to inspect it from below, which oftentimes for river crossings, it requires Idot to rent a barge, which is extremely expensive to be able to inspect these bridges. So you're creating an encumbrance in our maintenance staff to do their day-to-day activity. So we want to make sure that our engineers are aware of that it's not a simple, just make it 10 foot and you meet the policy and walk away. If you do, then you just have to make sure that that path is either you have either go with the understanding that you're going to need a barge with an alternate method of inspection, or make sure that the path itself is part of the structural components, so that a inspection vehicle would be able to ride on that path. So we would close that path temporarily while those inspections are going on. So those are some of the new developments that have been going on in our policy and training. So these three are the big change. Basically, we formalized the emissions for bicycle and pedestrian accommodations, which is that exception from the secretary. There used to be a memo that we would put together, but however, that memo wasn't an official document or a form. So we've made it statewide, the same document for every single district. And then we have the bicycle travel assessment, which again, we were required to do as part of our engineering studies, but there was no form. It was all just at your own guidance. And then brand new to the policy is the bike level of service, which was added in 2019 for on-road accommodations. So this is what the form for the emissions looks like. It's a pretty straightforward form. Again, we've never requested it or we've never carried it much more than a thought to getting this process statewide. So overall, not a big deal. This one's the big one, the bicycle travel assessment. So bicycle travel assessment is used on all projects other than those excluded. So the engineers will have to fill out this form, make sure that they've document which organizations and public coordinations they've talked to and what the comments were, as well as documenting which warrants are met or not met. and then a record of local coordination. There's a map of travel generator that has to be included. And then it's not required, but I personally like to have a plan view of the proposed accommodations because it really helps me to understand. And I would say 8 to 9 times out of 10, I see the plan view and there's things that are not really covered in the form that do not meet our policy that I have to go back to the engineers so that they can make the necessary adjustments. I created an email address so that these forms can go to, and I get 100 emails a day, so it's really nice to have these filtered out because one of the other new requirements that came as part of the policy is that since every district has a bikeway or bicycle coordinator, that they have to approve these bicycle travel assessments for every single project. So in order for me to not delay projects, I created that email address to have that expedited communication. For the purposes of making sure that we have some checks and balances, we do coordinate with our bicycle pedestrian policy engineer in Springfield in case they have any concerns with what's being proposed or it's a matter of just reference. But the district ultimately approves the bicycle travel assessment. This handsome gentleman is our new statewide bicycle pedestrian policy engineer. I think I saw him somewhere in the attendees list. So Steve Letsky from Peoria. He is responsible for all of the district ADA and bikeway coordinators for all 9 districts in the state of Illinois. So you see him, give him a good pat on the back. This list over here, I just wanted to show you guys who the district ADA and bikeway coordinators are for all 9 districts. Oftentimes we hear from consultants or agencies that they have a project and they don't know who to talk to. So a nice line to have. In the case of our district, for ADA coordinators, there's 2. I take all the credit, and then Amruta Mate does all the work. So our relationship is fantastic. She does all of the exceptions and approvals and a lot of the questions from construction, whereas I kind of focus more on just policy, reporting, and training. So this is what the bicycle travel assessment looks like. I won't go into too much detail in filling it out. Again, when you have an exhibit, it really helps to show what your proposed improvements are. You can see what the separation from traffic is, whether you have enough right-of-way acquisition to accommodate these cross-sections. So it really helps to outline what the proposed improvements are. And oftentimes we talk about making sure that we don't preclude a bicycle accommodation from taking place. So I love pretty pictures. So if you can send me a diagram showing, hey, the locals said that they did not want a bike path along this corridor, but again, we have to make sure to not preclude it. So you can show me in the future a shared use path can be incorporated, and they can show me here's a 10-foot path with proper handrails. And then for the current proposed accommodations, they can say, well, I'm putting in a sidewalk within those 10 feet. I'll put in a 5-foot sidewalk. It meets all the requirements. We're not precluding it, and we're able to move on with our improvements. So as I mentioned, bicycle level of service is something that is new to the policy. We do have acceptable bicycle level of service guidance for our engineers. For urban core and rural town, it's a level of service C. Same thing for suburban, and then for rural, it's a level of service D. There's a new form, BD 1703 is a spreadsheet with a tab for bicycle lanes and a tab for shoulder accommodations. And basically, there's no design exception that's required for not meeting these acceptable bike level of service, but it's a tool to help communicate that there's a red flag that you should try to address. So if you're not hitting these targets, then you should look to consider adjusting either the design width, the speed, maybe removing parking or going for a shared use path instead. The table in Chapter 17, Figure 2A, that table was designed with these acceptable levels of service. So if you go with that table and the recommendations, then you are meeting by default these levels of service. So here's a snapshot of what those spreadsheets look like. The heavy vehicle volume is the multi-unit vehicle, and then the pavement rating survey rating. We don't want our engineers to use, a 9 for perfect pavement. We want to make sure that we want to know what the level of service is going to be when the pavement is not as good. So anything under 6 calls for attention to a future resurfacing. So we tell the engineers to make sure to put a 5 or a 6 in their CRS value. Pedestrian accommodations, one of the nice things that took place in the BDE manual with the 2019 update is that bike and peds, oftentimes either the chapter was really good with pedestrian accommodations and then very silent on bicycles. And then it took the different turn. It was very good for bicycles, not a lot of information for peds. So I'm glad that the update includes now separate sections for bike and ped. So even though some of the information may be slightly redundant, it's nice to have it in 2 separate places so that you can just go get exactly what you need. So you can see that there's guidance for roadway and structures, specifically geared towards sidewalks. This isn't in the Bureau of Design and Environment manual, but our Bureau of Traffic Operations and Central Office, they released TRA 23, which is a guidance for uncontrolled crossings, which before it used to be that Idot did not have a way other than a subjective opinion as to say whether they felt comfortable installing a mid-block crossing. So this guidance provides them with some pretty nifty tools and tables to justify either the proposal or of a mid-block crossing. So you'll go with your ADT, posted speed, roadway configuration, and you'll be able to identify a treatment as to what the recommendation can be. Provides guidance as to which type of pavement marking to utilize, as well as some cost estimating tables to make sure that your project is not losing its budget marks. I like pretty pictures, so you'll see here the different treatments. Treatment 1 is just the crossing sign with the crossing ahead symbol, as well as the arrow. Treatment 2 has a flasher. Treatment 3 has a stop here for pedestrian with a stop bar and the appropriate signage. Treatment 4 would be an RFB, so a rectangular rapid flashing beacon. And then treatment 5 would be either a pedestrian hybrid beacon or a pedestrian traffic signal. Pedestrian hybrid beacons is something that our central office operations staff is still looking at. There is no policy to allow pedestrian hybrid beacons on state highways, so it would really default to a pedestrian traffic signal. But they are looking into whether that's something that the state would feel comfortable including. Provide guidance for different crosswalk patterns. And then lastly, one of the things that I really like is it used to be that engineers come to me and ask me, hey, when do I have to put in a handrail or a safety rail? What is that drop off? And there was nothing in the BDE manual that gave me that guidance. There's very little guidance elsewhere aside from the bike guide. The Astro bike guide does provide these guidance. So I would always refer to that to give them information as to when is it appropriate to have safety rails. So I'm glad that this update included a section specifically just for safety rails and handrail considerations, depending on the various slopes and drop-offs that you would have on your site. So the district does have a district detail for bicycle railings. So this is what that detail looks like. We have installed it in a pretty good selection of projects. So we have tested it out. So it seems to be working out pretty well. So I know I went fast. Hopefully I didn't take too much of your time. So if you have any questions, feel free to contact me. Bike-related questions or inquiries, you can email at the top email address, ADA-related inquiries, the dot.d1.ada. And that is all I have.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Carlos. A lot of really good information. What I'm going to do is briefly turn it over to Caitlin to just see if there's any questions in the chat boxes. So Caitlin, could you tell us any of the questions that came up?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for the presentation, Carlos. Let's see here. Sid Kenyon had a question. He was wondering, what does Idot consider to be the peak 3 months? And is that June through August?
That's a great question. So yeah, it would be the summer times. It would be June through August. I don't think our policy, we've never really nailed it down to a specific group of months. But yeah, it would be the summer times. You know, every district is different, so I think they've kind of held back on what that peak period is. District 1, it's going to be the summer times. You go to District 9 down in Metropolis, you know, it'll be 12 months, so people could be riding in January. So there's no specific period statewide, but it's wherever that project is taking place.
Okay, thank you.
Great. And then one more question, which it looks like Steve answered, but I'll just go ahead and ask it anyway. So this is from Tim, and he wanted to know, do you know when Idot plans to update its pavement marking and maintenance agreements so that their contractors would be able to maintain green pavement markings?
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure that the reason why Steve chimed in is because Steve is developing the policy spec for the green pavement marking so that districts have that guidance, because right now it's the Wild West because we don't have, we've never used it before. So yeah, I think that's pretty much what's coming down. As far as when Idot, especially our District 1, would be installing green pavement marking, you know, I think we're going to look at it on a case-by-case basis. As I mentioned, you know, that's really more of our traffic operations and maintenance bureau. They're really their decision to make, but we want to make sure to be cautious when using it, because we don't want to throw everything in the kitchen sink and then problems happen in the future and there's nothing that we have left other than either removing the facility or significantly changing that roadway. So in my conversations with our operations staff, they've really focused on let's put a facility that makes bicyclists visible, and if there's problems in the future, then at least we can fall back on green pavement to say there's a problem with the conflict points between bicycles and vehicles, so we should add green pavement to kind of call more attention, because what we put out there is not enough. But the policy just came out late last year, so it's all new to everybody. So we're cautiously proceeding forward with how to implement green pavement.
Okay, great. And then one more question here that just popped into the chat box from Pam. At mid-block crossings, what is IDOT's thought of adding a stop ahead pavement marking and regulatory sign 50 feet before the standard stop sign at the road?
That's a good question. I would just have to refer to what the guidance says. I do believe it does have a stop ahead for pedestrian sign as part of the treatment requirement. Off the top of my head, I don't know that I can answer that question. Usually that's something that we defer to our traffic operations engineers. But the guidance does provide the required signage and distances for where those signs have to be placed.
All right. I was going to just check in because sometimes it's difficult for individuals to utilize the chat box. If there's anybody else that has a question or a comment, unmute yourself and I will recognize you. If you're on the phone, that might be a little bit more difficult for me to do. But so if anybody else has any question or comments. All right. Well, thank you very much, Carlos. Really appreciate the presentation. We're going to move then on to item number 6. It's the CMAP road safety target settings, and Todd Smith from CMAP is going to present on this.
Okay, good afternoon, and thank you for having me. Today I'm going to present on the 2021 Highway Safety Performance Targets. I'm going to start off with the background on the Highway Safety Performance Targets. I presented the 2020 Highway Safety Performance Targets to the committee last year, so I'll provide a refresher on what they are and why we set them, and then jump into Idot's 2021 statewide highway safety targets, provide the process and timeline for setting the regional highway safety targets, and wrap up with a few discussion questions. Next slide. A little background. As part of MAP 21 and continuing the FAST Act, Transportation Performance Management, or TPM, is intended to track national goals at the state and regional level for safety, asset condition, system performance, congestion management, air quality. Transportation Performance Management requires state DOTs and MPOs to set a series of performance targets to track the progress toward achieving those targets. By implementing TPM, agencies will be required to track system performance over time and evaluate the effectiveness of policies, plans, and programs. Up on this slide, I have what I call the circle of TPM. It's provided by FHWA, and it really goes through the process of transportation performance management. So we start off with the national goals, and then FHWA set a series of measures for each of the categories: safety, asset condition, system performance, and CMAC. And then MPOs and state DOTs are required to set targets. And then after we set the targets, state DOTs and MPOs have plans on how they're going to achieve those targets, and then they report out on how they achieve those targets or if they achieve those targets. And then finally, this provides accountability and transparency on how we are progressing towards our goals. For safety, we go through this circle, the 2 through 6, on an annual basis. And then for the other ones, for system performance and CMAC, we go through this process every 2 to 3 years. So a little background: the Safety Rule PM requires state DOTs and MPOs to establish highway safety targets as 5-year rolling averages on all public roads for 5 performance measures. That include the number of fatalities, the rate of fatalities per 100 million vehicle miles traveled, or VMT, number of serious injuries, rate of serious injuries per 100 million VMT, and the number of non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries. The US DOT defines serious injuries using the Model Minimum Uniform Crash Criteria, or MUC 4th edition, suspected serious injury, otherwise known as an A injury. It's defined as injury other than fatal that results in one of the following: severe laceration, broken and distorted extremity, crush injuries, suspected skull, chest, or abdominal injury, significant burns, unconsciousness when taken from the crash scene, or paralysis. So these are pretty serious injuries that result from the crash. The MPO has 180 days to commit to support the state's DOT's targets or establish its own targets. Highway safety targets are to be set each year. And this is our 4th year setting highway safety targets, and the CMAP MPO has supported Idot safety targets the last 3 years. Each year, FHWA determines if a state has met or made significant progress toward meeting its highway safety performance targets. A state is considered to have met or made significant progress toward meeting its safety targets when at least 4 of the 5 targets are met, or the outcome of the performance measure is better than the baseline performance the year prior to target setting. So these 21 targets, the baseline would be the 2019 5-year average. So you have that little gap year in there. So you're really using the most recent data that's available to us to set the targets. If it's determined that the state has not met or made significant progress toward meeting its highway safety performance targets, the state will be required to use all highway safety improvement, or HSIP, funds only for safety projects. States must also develop a HSIP implementation plan. So Idot already uses our HSIP funds only for safety projects, so they are good on that part of the penalty, but they would have to have additional work in developing the HSIP implementation plan. And unfortunately for Idot and the state, they did not meet the 2018 safety targets, so they are in penalty. They are currently in penalty. And the MPO does not have any penalties for missing its targets. Whether the MPO supports the state's targets or sets its own targets, the MPO is required to show how it's planning and programming to help achieve the safety targets. This is accomplished through integrating the safety targets into the Transportation Improvement Program, or TIP, our long-range plan, and other planning activities. Next slide, please. Before I jump into this slide, I want to provide a little insight on how Idot sets its safety targets. Idot uses two methods to set safety statewide targets: a policy-based 2% reduction in the 5-year average, or a trend line analysis. Idot then selects the method that results in the greatest reduction. So usually that 2% reduction results in the greatest reduction. So these the safety targets they have are very aggressive. And then Idot does not consider previous targets when setting the new targets. So the graph on this slide shows the 5-year rolling average for statewide fatalities starting in 2013 through 2019 in the solid blue line. Idot's statewide targets are shown in the dashed blue line. The 2021 fatality target rate is 1,000, and this target was set using the policy-based 2% reduction. The green diamonds on the slide are the Idot's previous targets for fatalities, and they're there just to show where we are and the targets in the past. Unfortunately, the 5-year average in fatalities in the state have been trending upwards the last couple of years. And Idot has a website where they track fatalities up to the current date for the current year. And we thought with the pandemic that we would be seeing a decrease in fatalities. I checked the website, and up to this day last year, we are just 2 behind last year. So even though we're in the midst of a pandemic, we're still, our fatalities are pretty much the same. We still have until the end of the year, but it's not looking too good for us. Next slide, please. This is Idot's fatality rate target for 2021. The graph on this slide shows the 5-year rolling average for the statewide fatality rate per 100 million VMT, or vehicle miles traveled, starting in 2013 to 2019 in the solid blue line. Idot's statewide targets are shown in the dashed blue line. The 2021 fatality target is 0.93. And again, was set using the policy-based 2% reduction. And again, the green diamonds show the past fatality rates. So we have increasing fatalities in our VMT, or our fatalities up to this date this year has been staying the same, but our VMT has dropped significantly. So we're going to see some changes next year when the numbers are finally processed for 2020. Next slide, please. Idot 2021 serious injury target. The graph on this slide shows the 5-year rolling average for statewide serious injury starting in 2013 to 2018 in the solid blue line. Idot statewide targets again are shown in the dashed blue line. The 2021 statewide target is 11,556.4, and this target again was set based using the 2% reduction. So the interesting part on this one is the trend line is going down, and we do see the decrease in the 5-year average for the serious injuries, but Idot also just, instead of using the trend line, they took that more aggressive 2% target, even though we see a nice trend going down. And again, the green diamonds are Idot's past serious injury targets. One thing to note on this chart is the 2015 and 2019 5-year rolling average is estimated. This is due to the 2019 crash data not being processed in time to set the targets. So they estimate the 2019 number, and then from that number, that's where they take the 2% reduction in the annual 5-year average to get the 2021 target. Next slide, please. Idot 2021 serious injury target. This graph again shows the historic rolling 5-year average with the solid blue line for injury rates per 100 million VMT starting in 2013 to 2018. And Idot statewide targets are shown in the dashed blue line. The 2021 serious injury target is 10.79, and this target was set using the policy-based 2% reduction. Like the previous slide, the 2019 5-year average is estimated due to not having the 2019 data processed in time. So like the serious injury rate, or the serious injuries, we see the decreasing 5-year averages playing out also in this slide too, in the serious injury target, serious injury rate. Next slide, please. Idot 2021 non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries. The graph on this slide again shows the 5-year rolling average statewide number of non-motorized serious injuries and fatalities starting in 2013 to 2018 in the solid blue line, and Idot statewide targets are shown in the dashed blue line. The 2021 statewide non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries target is 1,517.6, And the target was set using the 2% policy-based 2% reduction. And the green diamonds are the past non-motorized serious injuries and fatalities. Unfortunately, like fatalities, the trend is going up in the wrong direction for the non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries. The 5-year average of non-motorized and serious injuries is moving up at an alarming rate, and this is especially important for our region because we have such a high number of cyclists and pedestrians in this region compared to the rest of the state. Next slide, please. Highway safety target setting timeline. Idot sent the 2021 statewide targets to the MPOs last week, so staff has not had time to make a recommendation on whether the MPO should support the state's targets or set its own. In the next month, staff will dig into the numbers, both at the state and regional level, to have a better understanding of how the region is performing and have internal discussions on the target. Cmaps staff will then share the recommendation with Regional Transportation Operations Coalition in November for discussion. We'd like to send it out to this committee for comments, or if you'd like to have a phone call with us, we'd be more than happy to discuss the recommendation with a phone call. CMAP staff will then review the comments and adjust the staff recommendation as necessary, and then take the staff recommendation to the Transportation Committee in December for approval. Staff will then make its recommendation in January at the January Board and MPO Policy Committee for approval. Next slide, please. Discussion questions for the committee. Should the region support IDOT's targets or set its own targets? As mentioned earlier, the CMAP MPO has supported IDOT statewide targets the last 3 years. While IDOT's targets are aggressive, it is nice to have a unified goal for the state and the region to strive for. Next discussion question is, how can CMAP and its partners help achieve the safety goals targets for the region? CMAP has started to work more in the traffic safety area. We completed the traffic safety white paper a few years ago that provided direction for CMAP to move forward in the traffic safety space. CMAP has incorporated safety into its programming activities such as STP and CMAC. We have also started incorporating safety into some of our LTA work. In addition, CMAP is starting a project with the village of Flossmoor through the LTA program to complete a local road safety plan for the village. CMAP is also working on a safety action agenda and hired a full-time staff to lead that effort. I'd like to take a moment to introduce Victoria Jacobson, who will lead this work. Victoria would like to say a few words to the committee.
Hi, everybody. My name is Victoria Jacobson. I'm a transportation planner. I've been in consulting in the bike ped transit field, working on safety issues, and I'm excited to join the CMAP team. Today is day 3. So this committee will be really important. This task force will be really important in the work that we do as we try to advance the kind of comprehensive safety agenda for the region. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Victoria. The safety action agenda will be discussed at the Transportation Committee on Friday. If you'd like to learn more, there is a memo available on the Transportation Committee webpage, or you can reach out to myself or Victoria and discuss the safety action agenda. For that, thank you.
Thank you very much, Todd. Caitlin, I'm not seeing any questions in the chat box, but if there are any committee members that have any questions, unmute and I'll recognize you. All right, Jessica. Are you there, Jessica? Yeah, we're having difficulty hearing you, Jessica. Is there anybody else that might have a question? I don't see any others. Todd, I was going to ask, and Jessica actually represents all of us on the Transportation Committee. We'll try to make sure that she somehow gets her questions to you, as well as if anybody in the group has any. I see that Jessica just put up her question in chat box, and it says, do we know what is driving the fatalities? She was surprised to hear the fatalities have not gone down during the pandemic.
We do not know what's currently driving the fatalities. We can make assumptions that with the lower volumes on the road, people might be driving faster, speeding, or more aggressively. But we will not know, we will not have the data for 2020 until sometime next year this time. So we will not have information until next September of 2021 to really look at the causes of the fatalities.
Okay, thank you, Todd. Todd, you had mentioned earlier that the target setting timeline aspect, that there's some time for us to have, on this task force to have input into that process. Beyond perhaps some questions that Jessica might take forward to Transportation Committee, is there any other guidance that you can give us just to make sure that this task force has an opportunity to participate, or can we be notified by email relative to any upcoming discussions, etc.?
Yes, once we have the staff recommendation in October, I will share the staff recommendation with Jen, and she can send the recommendation out to the committee. We also will be presenting this recommendation at the Regional Transportation Operations Coalition in November, so be welcome to attend that meeting to see a presentation on the staff recommendation and provide comments at that meeting. You know, we just got this data, so we do find my take right now is the targets are very aggressive, you know, as a region, we like to have aggressive targets, but we also like to have regional targets. So I think we need to take a look at how the state's performing and how the region's performing, and come up with a staff recommendation, and we'll get back to the committee via email or a phone call.
Okay, Todd. Sydney, you have a comment?
Yeah, I just want to sort of touch on Jessica's question. You know, speaking from the position of DuPage County DOT, there has been a clear and troubling uptick in serious injuries and fatalities with bicyclists and pedestrians, at least in DuPage. There have been a few rather high-profile ones that have taken place in DuPage over the summertime. And when you look at the crash report, it appears as though there is a lack of awareness on occasion from the people who are crossing the street. That was the case on Crest Road. That was the case on 75th Street. And I think what troubles me so much about it is that, you know, Active Trans had actually put together a pretty comprehensive plan to try to get out there and do more bicycle safety education in the schools, in the communities, and COVID-19 really foiled that. And I just can't help but wonder if there are other initiatives like that in the region that were intended to help educate people who are interested in becoming bike riders, or want to get out there and find more active transportation opportunities that have similarly been foiled by the pandemic. So, you know, I'm kind of nervous to see what the stats show for this year. I think we're going to see more of an uptick, and I think it is a combination of the drivers driving faster and not expecting pedestrians and bicyclists to be there, but also some of the people who are out there riding are brand new and have never done it.
Yes, thank you. And part of the safety agenda that we're coming out with, you'll find out more about at the, we'll talk more at the TC meeting on Transportation Committee on Friday. One of the goals for that is to, you know, come together as a region and have a safety task force that will meet and help CMAP identify which direction we should go on safety. And also part of that project will be to complete 1 to 2 policy papers. And one of the policy papers we'd like to explore, or the topic we'd like to explore, is speed management, because we realize that speed is a problem out there, and understanding what's going on and coming up with policies for the region to implement is key to making the road safer for all users, and to help drivers, or maybe encourage drivers to slow down a little bit when driving.
Nobody drives as crazy as we do in Illinois. I could say that for certain.
All right. And then I think there was one more comment question, Victoria Jacobson. With higher rates of non-motorized travel in our region versus the state, it might be appropriate to adjust our region's targets to more aggressive, to be more aggressive at reducing fatalities, injuries of vulnerable modes. Any thoughts?
Well, it's a good one, Victoria, because you could almost argue it either way, right? You could argue that maybe we should temper our expectations, but you could also argue that we should be more aggressive. And I don't, Todd, I don't know if you shared how our region compares against the rest of the state. If you did, I apologize if I missed it, but I'd be curious to see how much higher than the rest of the state our fatality rate is, so that we could get a sense for how much more aggressive we'd like to be, I guess, than Idot's standards, Idot's expectations.
Unfortunately, we just received the targets last week, so we weren't ready for them, and we haven't updated the region's share yet. But I know we're working on it, and we'll probably have that within the next week to inform our staff recommendations to see how we are performing as a region.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Victoria, did you have anything else to comment on?
No, that's it. Just a thought I had while we were wrapping up.
Okay, thank you. All right, thank you, Todd. I'm gonna move on to the next agenda item. Again, make sure if this is something you want to be involved in, there are opportunities. Make sure that you emailed Jen and Caitlin or Todd and Jessica too, again, representing us on Transportation Committee. Moving on to item 7, Cmaps virtual public engagement. Jane Grover from Cmap is going to present on that. Hi, Jane.
Hey, Tom. Thanks so much. Thank you, Caitlin and Jen, for the meeting, and to Jen for advancing my slides. Let's go to the next one. Let's get off my name right away. So a little context here. Ours is the 3rd largest region, metropolitan region in the United States. Our 7 counties have more residents at 8.5 million than the populations of Iowa and Wisconsin combined. And our 284 municipalities are almost the same number as the entire state of Washington. We've got a lot of real estate from Indiana to Wisconsin, and all of this presents some obvious challenges to find and engage our region's varied constituencies. It's even more challenging now as we pivot to virtual public engagement. And I'm trying to avoid saying the word pandemic through the entire presentation. We'll see. All right, next slide, Caitlin, or Jen, thanks. So Cmap engages the public on myriad projects from the local to region-wide, and one of our biggest public engagement initiatives was for the development of the Onto 2050 plan. And here's how that public engagement story ended. The next slide, please, Jen. So over 3 years, we did forums, workshops, we ran social media, website surveys, and we used a fleet of touchscreen kiosks throughout the region to gather public input. We would now need a dispenser of hand sanitizer next to those public kiosks, touchscreen kiosks. Most of this public engagement was in person. And if you're wondering why I'm bringing up our public engagement for this regional plan, it's because I thought you might enjoy seeing photos of people in person, happy, glad to be engaged, talking to each other in person. And I'm going to put a question in the chat box. I'd like you to answer in the chat box, if you would, is, do you miss in-person public engagement? Yes, no, it depends, maybe. Answer the question right in the chat box, if you would. Do you miss in-person public engagement? Thank you, Alan. Come on, everybody. Find the chat box. Here we go. Thank you, thank you. It depends, from Leanne. Looks like a great endorsement of in-person public engagement. Glad to hear Jessica Hyink from Evanston. Great. So let's go to the next slide. Our public engagement now looks more like this. Let's go to the next slide. But the lessons that we learned from our public engagement for Onto 2050 haven't changed in this virtual world. In fact, they're really more guiding principles for meaningful and effective public engagement, in person or virtual, and that is, understand your audience, meet people where they are, and deploy multiple tools and methods. Next. So first, understand your audience. We are challenged to make our public engagement inclusive and meaningful to each audience. And in developing a public engagement strategy, recognize that there are communities that have historically been excluded from public participation or have significant barriers to participating. How can you identify everyone who needs to be asked, and how do you overcome those barriers? I think back to when I was a parent of grade school kids. One of the most effective meetings that I went to, the most inclusive, were my local PTA meeting. The PTA council at the time figured out that the reason why the whole community wasn't attending the PTA meetings is because of two reasons. One is they still had to feed the kids and they didn't know what to do with the kids. And so the PTA provided pizza and childcare, and those PTA meetings were the best attended meetings that I had ever been to. We need to figure out what are the barriers that get in the way of people participating. And we also need to be explicit about race and ethnicity in designing our public engagement. Think about developing an equity lens, a series of questions about your public engagement, such as, what are the racial demographics of people living in the area that you're focused on? How are people of different racial groups affected by this issue or your project? Who faces racial or other barriers, bias, or exclusion related to your issue or your project? And how will your proposed project affect each group? It's important to go to every audience with sincerity, candor, and plain language. Avoid jargon, techno-speak, and all those acronyms that are so familiar to us. It doesn't mean dumbing down your presentation, but rather respecting your audience's intelligence and simply not assuming that they know what you know. So think about, what language do they use? What will catch their attention? What will they find provocative and interesting? And what's the story you want to tell? Namely, what are they wondering about? What are their questions? And what they're wondering is, how is this relevant to them? So lead with them. It's about them, and then you can fold in something about you. Second, meet people where they are. Next slide, please, Jen. So instead of a come to us approach, go to where people gather. In the olden days, before you know what, it was school career days, corporate lunch and learn events, county fairs, village meetings, meetings of neighborhood organizations, block parties. Now we're in virtual meetings, virtual happy hours, virtual classrooms, but also grocery stores, COVID testing sites. How can you get to those places safely? Connect with community organizations to broaden and deepen your public engagement. Look at specific geographies and identify groups doing work in those communities, and then invite yourself to their meeting agendas. In the olden days, it was in-person meetings of neighborhood organizations, leagues of women voters, Rotary clubs, environmental justice organizations, community aid groups. Now, turns out they're still meeting, they're just doing it in different ways, sometimes in a virtual platform, and you can still get on those meeting agendas. Can you zoom into the meeting of a community organization that's located where you want input from? Third, next slide please, is to deploy multiple tools and methods for your public engagement. Be expansive and flexible in the tools and methods you use, keeping in mind that I think from now on, we're going to be using a blend of in-person and virtual tools and methods for our public engagement. There will always now be a contingent of people who just won't be comfortable in public gatherings, and you got to figure out how to find them, get their input, but not require them to show up in person. In those olden days, it was workshops. We used surveys using handheld clickers to answer questions. We had open houses and those touchscreen iPad kiosks. Now we can still do online surveys. We have an engagement website. Here's a screenshot of Cmaps engagement website. We use social media, and we're using multiple meeting platforms, the Google Meets, Teams, Zoom, GoTo's, WebEx. There are a variety of collaboration tools we can use, Miro.com or Mural, Google Docs. Zoom even has annotations that you can use to play around with your screen. Lots of online polling tools like Mentimeter, Google Forms, Poll Everywhere, MetroQuest. Our platform is based on Bang the Table. This is our Engagement HQ site. The challenge, though, is how to drive folks to your online surveys and websites if they don't subscribe to your newsletter or follow you on social media. So be tactical in this. Put signage or poster boards at the places where people gather and go. I'm thinking those grocery stores and COVID testing sites. Do advertising if you can. How about old school, cool snail mail if you can afford it? Although 80% of US adults have a smartphone, not everyone whom you want to engage has a cell phone, much less one with apps and a data plan or even a laptop at home. So how do you bridge that digital divide? Again, go to where people are. Where do they gather? Low tech works. Share paper surveys, postage prepaid, please. Do an art installation, install a community blackboard, do a socially distanced resource table. You have to know where people are in the community you want to engage, and then go to where people are gathering. So I have a couple questions for you, and that we're really interested in knowing is, are there approaches, methods, tools that you have experienced that will help advance our goal of meaningful and inclusive public engagement? And are there community organizations in your orbit that CMAP should know? We can't assume that CMAP knows the whole universe of people in our 7-county region who should be engaged in CMAP's initiatives, and we would like to know who's important to you. So thanks so much. Put some of your thoughts in the chat box if you would, and we will collect them, or reach out to me. Let's see. I'm going to put my email in here if you have other thoughts.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Jane, thank you. Thank you very much. I think, Caitlin, I'm going to turn this over to you if you want to see if there's any questions there. I think I saw one pop up from Pam.
Let's see here. I see the questions that Jane just asked in the chat box, but I don't see any additional questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I need better glasses. No.
But if you do have something to say, please do feel free to email Jane directly with your ideas and input. I know she'd really value that.
Thanks in advance.
And feel free to unmute too, and I'll recognize individuals if they unmute.
Yeah, I just put a comment in, Alan.
Hey, Alan, go ahead.
One of the things I found is people really need to know that their input is really being considered, so that going to a meeting or going on Zoom, whatever, is not just a waste of time. So I think that's number one. And number two, one of the most effective ways that I've seen that occur, and sometimes this is a requirement of maybe Idot or the feds, is that after meetings, they have to publish questions and answers. So all the questions that were asked, and they could be consolidated, along with the answers, so people really get a sense of someone taking their concerns seriously, and people getting an idea of what other questions people have asked in different modes. So just two comments.
Thank you, Alan. Troy asked a question and Jane answered it in the chat box. I think the bicycle pedestrian is a good area, especially for our task force. But in the planning aspect too, I think that's a good area, overall area as well. And all right, any other thoughts or comments? Victoria, did you have?
One comment I was going to make, and I thought about it when we were, Jane, you asked a question about whether or not we miss in-person participation, and one of the things that any facilitator of public meetings can know is that standing up and speaking in front of a room full of people can be a daunting task for a citizen, particularly if it's an emotionally charged issue or the discourse has taken on an emotional tone. And there seems to be some benefit to the ability, for example, for us to chat our questions and our comments and have the group see them in a slightly less emotional forum. Then it might be one of the ways to engage people who are less courageous in speaking in front of a group, to engage a new kind of participant. Just a thought.
And I've seen locally that the virtual platforms seem to be a bit of a leveler. It's hard to commandeer a microphone.
Oh,
as it used to be, as easily as it used to be.
Keith, did you have a comment or question?
Yeah, so it's just kind of looking to see how we can start converting. But from what you said, with CDOT, we've been really kind of switched over to the open house format. And I think hopefully doing the electronic meeting should also allow for this sort of drop in, drop out kind of concept where you've got people available to have those conversations over an extended period and people don't feel they have to show up at the beginning and stay till the end. They can come in for the amount of time to talk about what they need to talk about and get those questions answered. So it'll be interesting to convert the open house format into some of these digital forms, but it may be a little bit more natural to do that. But that's, and hopefully with audio and text, it may be easier to do the transcribing of the type that Alan was describing when we've had the official comment receipt center where we take written or oral comments and such. So,
and some of these virtual engagement platforms are that kind of public forum where there can be conversation happening, but at everybody's convenience. So you don't have to show up at another time. Another way to do it is to stagger your events. Do an hour and a half open house, virtual open house one day, do it a different time the next day. You could break up these big engagement events too, to again, meet people where they are and more at their convenience.
Another comment about open houses, they're good as long as there's a part of the open house that everybody can get together and hear everybody else's questions. Because typically the open houses I've been to, and I've been to many of them, you walk around the room and you ask your individual question to an expert, but it's not heard by the rest of the group. So I think open house is fine, but there should be a time when everybody who's there can listen to other people's questions. Thank you.
All right. Well, Jane, I appreciate the presentation. There's a lot here that we continue to learn. It's a lot different than what we were doing 10, 20, 30 years ago. It keeps evolving, and I think we're getting better products for it. Sometimes I know that for me, the different open house type meetings, especially if it's project related, it's very scary. Planning, I don't mind any type of different forums for planning, but project related, it gets a little nerve-wracking sometimes. But yeah. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your sharing it. I think that's it then, unless anybody else had anything. All right, I'm going to move on to item 8, which is project updates. This is where implementing agencies are invited to provide a brief update on completed projects or different projects that they're currently working on of significance.
I got one for Village of Schaumburg. This is Patrick. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go for it, Patrick.
All right, we're in the middle now of kind of a modified bike month. We're going to have it June, but moved it to September in hopes that we could get just a little more participation from our community and also our business community. So, we're the 2 events that we're hosting. We have a business bike classic, we call it. So we have 19 teams competing from different businesses around the Village of Schaumburg. So we kind of exceeded our expectations. But we are allowing people to compete from home as long as they're based out of Schaumburg. Then we're also having a community photo challenge. So you bike around and you take basically a selfie with your bike at destinations, like restaurants, and parks. So it's kind of what's going on.
All right. Thanks, Patrick. Keith, did you have something?
Just also to add that, I think one thing that's happening also in these times is that there's reluctance to have formal opening ceremonies for projects. And so we still have not, I think after 8 or 9 months, had the official opening of the bridge over the North Shore Channel at Lincoln Village, but I did get to ride it on Labor Day, and it works very well. And it kind of combines with a lot of the work that even Lincolnwood has done on their North Shore Channel Trail as well, and going up further north. So if you're in that area by Lincoln Village Shopping Center, you can check out the new bike bridge that we've built and still haven't had a ribbon cutting for because of weather and the rest of 2020.
All right. Thanks, Keith. Alan, did you have something?
No.
Okay. Sydney, I saw yours on briefly. Did you have anything, Sydney?
Yeah, I just wanted to share, I think it was either last meeting or the meeting before, Jessica and I did a presentation on the East Branch DuPage River Trail. We're continuing to work on that project. We have extended the alignment study for the southern portion. And so if you do hear anything from the East Branch supporters who are quite tenacious, let them know that we're continuing to work ahead on that.
Thanks, Sydney. Troy?
Yeah, I just posted a link in. We added our bicycle plan map, which is based off of the CMAP BIS format, into an online map. So we show all of our program projects currently. Still in talks with a couple municipalities about projects that might be programmed that are not on our radar yet, but generally all of the federal aid projects and then all of the major ones are in there. And it's posted publicly on the Kane County DOT website. My dog's name is Max, Sydney.
Fantastic.
All right, Dave, Simmons, did you have something?
Yeah, just a quick note to all the folks that attended the Illinois Bike Summit yesterday and the professional training on Monday. A lot of familiar names on this session. So yeah, I just wanted to thank the energy, the enthusiasm, the ideas, whether you presented or attended. Despite a little technical difficulty, we were really pleased with the end result. So thanks, everybody.
Yeah, Dave, thank you to your efforts and all the people you work with, and Ed Barsati. It's, how do I say this? I'm very grateful that Illinois has these types of forums that are able to be put on. And I was going to ask too, I'm assuming with our passwords and stuff, we can still go online and watch some of the recordings, et cetera.
Yeah. Yep. You can do that through the platform for 30 days. We'll also be pulling the content down, collecting all the presentations. So it will be available after that. But if you wanted a quick hop in and watch a session or two, you could just log back into Excel events.
All right. Thank you. Any other final project updates? All right, I'll move on to any other business. And then any public comments? I am not seeing any public comments. Was there anything in the chat box that I may have missed that anybody saw?
I don't see any, and I just wanted to note that we also did not receive any comments via email ahead of time.
Okay, thank you, Jen. All right, our next meeting is scheduled for December 2nd. We typically have these meetings in mid-December, but they always end up getting canceled. So CMAP staff worked at trying to find a date that accommodated the most of us. And so that date is December 2nd, Wednesday at 1 p.m. So thanks, staff, for finding a date that hopefully that works for the majority of us. Trying to think, hey, Kevin, did you have anything you wanted to share with the group?
Nope.
Okay.
Thank you.
Alan, did you have anything more? I just
I'm
saw
going to move for adjournment if you had nothing else.
Oh, okay. All right, then I'm gonna ask for a motion to adjourn.
Sidney Kenyon, so moved.
Second, Kevin.
Do we have to do a roll call, Caitlin, or can we just?
I think we're good.
Okay, we're good. Thank you all. Really appreciate you attending today. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.